She is 26 weeks pregnant, lying on a cold examination table, listening to the heartbeat of the daughter she almost died trying to bring into this world. And on the television screen mounted on the clinic wall, her husband is smiling at another woman. Not just smiling, he is announcing their engagement. Roman Moretti, the most feared man in New York, the man who put a ring on Emily Whitmore's finger 3 years ago and swore she was the only woman he would ever love. Right now, he is lying through his teeth on national television. Don't go anywhere. This story will break you wide open. If you're watching from your city, drop it in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Hit like, follow the channel, and stay until the very last second. Because what happens to Emily Whitmore is going to remind you that sometimes losing everything is the only way to find out what you were worth all along. The ultrasound technician had kind eyes and cold hands. Emily had learned to accept both. After 3 miscarriages in 4 years, she had learned to accept a lot of things. The silence after bad news, the careful way doctors chose their words, the particular loneliness of sitting in a waiting room surrounded by happy couples while her husband sent a text saying he couldn't make it again. Something came up. She'd understand. She always understood. She was good at understanding things that deserved anger instead. The gel on her stomach was cold despite the warmer they kept it in. Small mercy. The technician, her name tag said Donna, moved the wand with practiced efficiency, and the room filled with that rushing aquatic sound that Emily had spent years praying to hear without grief attached to it. There she is, Donna said softly. There she was. Emily stared at the screen, a small, blurred shape, a nose that looked like Roman's, a mouth that looked like no one's yet, still becoming whatever it would be. Her chest went tight in a way that had nothing to do with pain and everything to do with the terrifying proximity of something she had almost stopped believing in. She was real. Charlotte. Roman had resisted the name at first, said it sounded old-fashioned, said they should pick something stronger. But Emily had held on to it with both hands the way she had learned to hold on to anything good in this marriage, quietly, without announcing it, until it became a fact. Heartbeat is strong, Donna said. 148, exactly where we want to be. Emily exhaled. Her hand moved to her stomach without thinking, pressing lightly against the swell of it. 26 weeks. 14 to go, if everything stayed the course, if her body cooperated. If the universe, which had not been particularly cooperative up to this point, decided to give her one uncomplicated thing. She's measuring perfectly, Donna continued, typing notes into her tablet. I'd say you've got nothing to worry about today, Mrs. Moretti. Emily almost corrected her. She had been going by Whitmore again at her doctor's appointments for the past several months, quietly, without legal ceremony. The way you start distancing yourself from something before you're willing to admit you're leaving it. But today she hadn't bothered correcting the intake form. Some days it felt like too much effort to explain the complicated architecture of her life to strangers. The television on the wall was playing a midday news broadcast on mute. Emily hadn't paid it any attention when she came in. It was just background, visual noise, something to look at when the silence in the room got too thick. She looked at it now because Donna had turned away to print something, and Emily's eyes had nowhere else to go, and the chyron at the bottom of the screen said Roman Moretti in bold white letters. Emily went still. On the screen, Roman stood at a podium outside what looked like the lobby of the Moretti Grand, the hotel on Fifth Avenue that served as the public, respectable face of everything his family touched. He was in a dark suit, navy, not black. He always said black was for funerals. His hair was the same as always, dark, slightly longer than it should be for a man of his position, a detail he had never cared about because Roman Moretti had never needed to care about what anyone thought of him. Beside him stood a woman Emily had never seen in person but recognized immediately. Victoria Sinclair. The name landed in Emily's chest like something dropped from a great height. Victoria Sinclair was 32, the daughter of a Connecticut real estate billionaire, and had spent the last decade being photographed at charity galas and fashion weeks in the kind of clothes that required their own insurance policies. She was beautiful in the aggressive, deliberate way of someone who had been trained to be beautiful the way other people were trained to be surgeons. Everything about her was a choice. Everything about her was correct. She was standing close enough to Roman that their shoulders touched. Emily reached for the remote on the bedside tray and unmuted the television. Her hand was steadier than it should have been. She noticed that distantly, the way you notice the weather from inside a house. Present, acknowledged, not yet felt. "Delighted to announce," Roman was saying, and his voice through the television speaker was exactly the same voice that had said her name in the dark, that had told her he was sorry about the second miscarriage, that had read to her from a novel she'd left on the nightstand once when she had the flu and couldn't hold the book up herself. "That Victoria and I will be married in the spring. We ask that the media respect our privacy during this time, and we look forward to, The rest of it turns to noise. Emily heard the heartbeat monitor still running. 148, strong and steady. Charlotte, who did not know yet what kind of world she was being born into, continued to exist with complete indifference to catastrophe. Donna came back into the room and stopped. She looked at Emily. She looked at the television. Something shifted in her face, a careful professional blankness descending over what had briefly been visible. "Mrs. Moretti." "Whitmore," Emily said. Her voice was even. She didn't know how. "It's Whitmore." She sat up. The ultrasound gel was still on her stomach. She reached for the paper towels on the tray and wiped it off with the same mechanical efficiency she was using to keep herself breathing, to keep her vision from narrowing, to keep the sound of Roman's voice from echoing in the space behind her sternum, where something had just collapsed. "Is there someone I can call for you?" Donna asked. "No." Emily folded the paper towel, set it down, reached for her shirt. "Print me the photos, please." "Of course. Are you sure you don't want to—" "I'd like the photos," Emily said again, "and then I'd like the room." Donna printed the photos. She left without another word, which was one of the kindest things anyone had done for Emily in recent memory. Emily sat on the edge of the examination table for a long time. The television was still on. The segment had moved to a panel of commentators dissecting the announcement with the cheerful energy of people who had no idea there was a woman in a clinic on the Upper East Side watching her marriage disintegrate in real time between one heartbeat and the next. She looked down at the ultrasound photo in her hand. Charlotte's profile. That nose. Emily pressed her thumb against the image and breathed through her nose and told herself quietly, in the internal voice she used only when things were very bad, "You are not going to fall apart in this room." She didn't. The penthouse on the 53rd floor of the Moretti Tower had floor-to-ceiling windows on 3 sides, which meant that no matter where you stood in the main living area, you were surrounded by New York in every direction. The grid of it, the impossible illuminated density of 10 million lives going on simultaneously in every adjacent building and block and borough. Emily had loved those windows when she first moved in. She had stood at them in the mornings with her coffee and felt, for a brief and foolish period, like someone who had arrived somewhere. She arrived home at 2:15 in the afternoon to find the penthouse empty. This was not unusual. Roman was rarely home before 7, and sometimes not before midnight, and sometimes not at all. And Emily had long since stopped asking where he was when he didn't come home because the answers were either lies or half-truths, and she had lost her tolerance for both. She set her keys on the kitchen counter. She set the ultrasound photos next to them. She stood in the kitchen for a moment, listening to the silence of a very expensive apartment that had never quite managed to feel like a home, and she thought about what she was going to do. She had options. She knew that. She had parents in Vermont who would take her in without hesitation or condition. She had a degree in nonprofit management that she had never really used because Roman had not been overtly opposed to her working, but had been consistently effective at making it complicated. The hours he kept, the security requirements, the way he could make something feel like her choice when it was structurally his. She had a bank account he didn't control because she had been careful about that, quietly. The way she had been quietly careful about a lot of things, in preparation for a future she had hoped she wouldn't need to plan for. She had a daughter with 26 weeks already done and 14 more to go. She went to the bedroom. She pulled the largest suitcase from the closet, the one she'd bought in the early years of the marriage when she still thought they would travel together, before she understood that Roman's version of travel meant a private flight and a hotel suite, and a schedule that had nothing to do with her. She set it open on the bed. She packed the things that mattered, not the jewelry. Most of it had been given as compensation for something. A missed birthday, a canceled trip, an evening she'd spent alone when she'd been promised otherwise, and she had never been able to wear any of it without feeling the weight of what it had cost her. Not the couture hanging in the second closet, bought by a stylist Roman had hired because he said he wanted her to look right at events. Not the things that were set decorations. She packed her books, her grandmother's quilt, the photographs from before the marriage, the ones of her parents' farmhouse in autumn, of her college friends at graduation, of herself at 22 looking slightly surprised and completely unguarded in a way she had trouble recognizing now. She packed Charlotte's first ultrasound, the one from 12 weeks when they'd both stood in a different doctor's office, and Roman had put his hand over his mouth, and she had thought, for the last sustained time, that they were going to make it. She packed practical things, clothes that fit her now, comfortable, no performance required. Her prenatal vitamins, the book her midwife had recommended, the journal she'd been keeping since the first trimester, which no one else had ever read. She was halfway through the second drawer when her phone rang. She looked at the screen. Roman. She let it ring. Once. Twice. Watched his name on the screen with the particular focus of someone memorizing something they intended to leave behind. On the fifth ring, she silenced it and put the phone face down on the dresser. She finished packing. So, the lobby of Moretti Tower had two security guards who had known Emily by name for 3 years. Marcus, who was 50 and had a daughter Charlotte's almost age in Queens and always asked about the pregnancy. Danny, who was 24 and still slightly nervous around her in a way that she had always found more endearing than it probably should have been. Marcus watched her come off the elevator with the large suitcase and the smaller bag over her shoulder, and the set of her jaw that he clearly recognized as something that required no commentary, and he said nothing. He just walked ahead and held the door. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, because somewhere along the way, without her having to ask, Marcus had started using the right name. "Thank you, Marcus." Outside, the city was doing what the city always did, existing at full volume and complete indifference, traffic and pedestrians, and a vendor on the corner selling hot nuts, and a woman arguing on her phone and a delivery driver cutting across 3 lanes. Emily stood on the sidewalk for a moment with her suitcase and let it all wash over her. She did not look back at the building. She got in a cab, gave the driver her parents' address. Not in Vermont, not yet. She wasn't ready for Vermont yet, but her friend Nadia's apartment in Park Slope, which was the first safe place she could think of, and sat in the back seat with her hand on her stomach and watched the city slide past the windows. Her phone rang again. Roman again. She turned it off completely. Bossing. Nadia Okafor had been Emily's best friend since their sophomore year of college, when they had been assigned to the same study group for an urban policy class and had spent more time arguing about everything else than about urban policy. Nadia was 31, worked as an ER nurse at Brooklyn Methodist, and had a small but fiercely organized apartment in Park Slope that smelled like the verbena candles she burned in every room. She opened the door before Emily could knock, which meant she had seen the news. She looked at Emily. She looked at the suitcase. She stepped back from the door. "Come in," she said. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "I'm so sorry." Just, "Come in." Which was why Nadia had been Emily's best friend for 9 years. Emily came in. She set the suitcase down in the hallway. She stood in Nadia's kitchen while Nadia put the kettle on without asking, and she looked at the wall of photographs above Nadia's desk. The two of them at graduation, at Nadia's brother's wedding, at a terrible camping trip in the Catskills the summer before Emily met Roman. And she felt for the first time since the clinic the particular internal loosening that comes before crying. She did not cry. She pressed her hands flat on the kitchen counter and breathed. "He didn't call," she said. "I know. I was at the doctor's when it aired. I watched it on a television in the examination room while I was listening to her heartbeat." Nadia was quiet for a moment. The kettle began its low build. "That's one of the crueler things I've ever heard," Nadia said finally, not with dramatic emphasis, but with the flat precision of someone stating a factual assessment. "He would say he didn't know I'd have a television on." "That's not an excuse." "I know it's not." Emily looked down at her hands on the counter. "I think I've been making excuses for so long that I've started hearing them in his voice instead of mine." "Yeah," Nadia said. "I noticed." The kettle boiled. Nadia poured. The verbena candles burned in 2 rooms simultaneously, their smell gentle and insistent. Emily accepted the mug and sat at the kitchen table and let herself be somewhere safe for the first time in a very long time. Roman called 11 more times that evening. Emily did not turn her phone on to count them. She found out later when she finally powered it back up the next morning and found the call log alongside 7 text messages, the content of which she read once and did not read again. The texts ran a predictable arc. The first 3 were attempts at explanation, compressed, clipped, the way Roman communicated when he was managing a situation rather than engaging with it. Victoria Sinclair was a business arrangement. The engagement was for optics. There were things Emily didn't understand about the pressure he was under, about what the family needed from him right now, about the way certain alliances had to be publicly formalized even if they were privately meaningless. The 4th text was shorter. I need you to come home. The 5th, Emily. The 6th, we need to talk about Charlotte. The 7th arrived at 2 a.m. and said nothing but her name. Emily read them all while sitting in Nadia's guest room with morning light coming through the curtain and Charlotte doing the small, fluttering movement she sometimes did in the early hours that Emily had come to think of as her daughter practicing being alive. She read them, and she set the phone down, and she thought about what Roman had said at their wedding, standing in that garden in Connecticut with her parents and his mother, and 100 people who were there for reasons that had nothing to do with love, looking directly at her with an expression she had believed was real. You are the one thing in my life that I am not willing to compromise. She had spent 3 years watching him compromise her so gradually that she had almost convinced herself it wasn't happening. She didn't respond to any of the texts. So the lawyers arrived 4 days later. Not Roman. Roman did not come himself. He sent 2 attorneys from the firm that handled the Moretti family's legal affairs, a man named Hargrove and a woman whose name Emily forgot immediately, both of them in dark suits with the particular corporate neutrality of people paid to deliver bad news as if it were routine paperwork. They came to Nadia's apartment, which told Emily that Roman knew where she was, which she had expected. Roman had always known where she was. It was one of the features of being married to him that she had told herself was protection. Nadia let them in with the expression of someone who had rehearsed this moment and was ready to ask them to leave at any point. Hargrove laid 3 documents on the kitchen table. He explained them in order, his voice even and professionally sympathetic in a way that made her want to push the table over. The first was a petition for dissolution of marriage, already filed. Irreconcilable differences. Uncontested if she signed. The second was a confidentiality agreement covering, in precise legal language, everything Emily had ever known, seen, heard, or suspected about the operations of the Moretti family enterprise. The third was a cashier's check. She looked at the number on it for a long time. It was a significant number. It was the kind of number that was meant to make someone feel paid off rather than bought off, the distinction being purely psychological and ultimately meaningless. Mr. Moretti wants to ensure that you and the child are provided for, Hargrove said. Emily picked up the check. She looked at it. She thought about the examination room. She thought about 148 beats per minute. She thought about Roman's face on the television screen, turned toward Victoria Sinclair, and the particular quality of his smile, practiced, public, the smile he used when he was performing confidence for an audience. She tore the check in half, then in quarters. She set the pieces on the table. Hargrove blinked. His colleague did not visibly react, which suggested she had been trained specifically for this. The divorce papers, Emily said. I'll need my own attorney to review them. Not sign, review. Of course. The confidentiality agreement. She pushed it across the table without looking at it. Tell Mr. Moretti that I don't need a legal document to keep his secrets. I've been keeping them for 3 years for free. Hargrove gathered the agreement without comment. And tell him, Emily added in the same even tone she had been using since the clinic, the tone she was beginning to recognize as what happened to her voice when she was holding grief in place by force of will, that his daughter's name is Charlotte, not the child. She stood. The meeting was over. Month. Gabriel Moretti called the following Tuesday. Emily almost didn't answer. The name on her screen was Gabriel M., which she had saved that way 3 years ago during a family dinner in Connecticut when she'd realized she needed to be able to distinguish his calls from his brother's, and had spent the following years barely needing to use the contact at all. Gabriel was 41 to Roman's 38. He was the older brother, the one who had watched his father build the Moretti empire from something brutal into something merely ruthless, and who had made a different choice when the time came. Not to leave entirely, because leaving the Moretti family was not a clean process, but to carve out a lane within the family's public apparatus that he could live inside without losing himself. He ran the Moretti Family Foundation, scholarship programs, community investment, a domestic violence shelter in the Bronx that Emily had once tried to volunteer at before Roman made it complicated. Gabriel worked quietly and without fanfare, and had always struck Emily as a man who had decided exactly what he was willing to be, and was at peace with the parameters he had set. He had a stillness that his brother had never possessed. She answered. "Emily," he said. His voice was careful, not cautious the way lawyers were cautious, measuring each word for liability, but careful the way someone is careful when they understand that the person they are speaking to is handling something fragile. "Gabriel, I want to say something, and I want you to hear it for what it is, and not as a Moretti family management exercise." She waited. "I'm sorry," he said. "What Roman did was wrong. The timing of it, the way it was done, the fact that it was done at all. None of that reflects a man who understands what he has." A pause. "Had." Emily sat with that for a moment. The word had, past tense. Gabriel saying it like a closed door. "Your mother," Emily said. "Does she?" "She saw the announcement the same way you did. On television." Another pause. "She is not handling it quietly." Emily almost laughed. Eleanor Moretti was 73 and had survived 3 decades in the orbit of powerful, destructive men, and she had survived them by being smarter and harder than all of them, and by loving the things they undervalued: her children, her garden, the particular quality of loyalty that only becomes visible under pressure. "I'm not calling to ask you to reconsider anything," Gabriel said. "I'm calling because whatever happens next, Charlotte is family. And you were family before you were ever a Moretti." Emily pressed her fingertips against her sternum, breathed. "I don't need anything from the family," she said. "I know. I'm not offering you the family. I'm offering you me." He paused again, and when he continued, his voice was completely even. "I'm in the city on Tuesdays and Thursdays. If you ever want coffee, or if you need something moved, or a doctor recommended, or someone to sit in a waiting room." A beat. "No conditions." Emily looked at the wall of Nadia's guest room, the light through the curtain, the ultrasound photo she had tacked to the wall above the bed, Charlotte's profile, that nose. "I'll think about it," she said. "That's enough," Gabriel said. She thought about it for 10 days. Then she called him. They met at a coffee shop in Carroll Gardens. Not Moretti territory, not Sinclair territory, not anywhere that had a history attached to it. Just a corner place that smelled like espresso and fresh bread. Gabriel was there before her, which she had expected. He was always exactly where he said he would be at exactly the time he said he would be there. It was a quality so rare in her recent experience that she had to recalibrate to accommodate it. He stood when she came in. He did not hug her. He pulled out the chair across from him and waited. She sat down and they ordered coffee, decaf for her, the baby, and he did not ask her how she was doing immediately, which was also a small mercy because she had been asked how she was doing more times in the past 10 days than in the past 2 years combined, and she was exhausted by the performance of answering. Instead, he said, "The foundation has an opening in our grant coordination team. It's part-time, remote. You'd essentially be reviewing applications and corresponding with community partners. The salary is honest and the work is real." Emily looked at him across the table. "Are you offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a reason to be useful," he said, "which I suspect is what you actually need, not the job." She held his gaze for a moment. He didn't look away. "When does it start?" she said. "When you're ready." She called her parents that night. Her mother answered on the first ring, which was how she had always answered, as if she kept the phone within reach at all times for exactly this kind of call. "Mom," Emily said, and that was the only word she needed. Her mother said, "Come home." Emily said, "Soon." "Not yet. I have some things to take care of first." Her mother said, "We're here. We're not going anywhere." Emily stood at the window of Nadia's guest room and looked at the lights of Park Slope at 11 o'clock at night, the ordinary, unheroic, continuous light of people living their lives in proximity to each other. and felt the specific texture of knowing that certain things had ended and certain other things were only just beginning, and that the distance between those two realities was where she currently lived, alone in the middle of it, 26 weeks and 4 days pregnant, holding a phone with her mother's voice still warm on the line. "I know," she said. "I know you are." She hung up. She turned from the window, and that was when her phone buzzed with a notification from a gossip column's breaking news alert. A source close to Roman Moretti confirming that the Moretti heir's estranged wife had fled the family home and that questions were being raised about the legitimacy of the marriage contract and the potential custody implications of her departure. Emily read it twice. Source close to Roman Moretti. She set the phone face down on the nightstand. She lay down. She put her hand on her stomach. Charlotte moved. That small, persistent, entirely indifferent flutter of a person in the process of becoming. "I know," Emily said to her, quietly, in the dark. "I know." But even as she said it, the notification's words kept circling, custody implications, questions about legitimacy. And somewhere across the city, in the Moretti Tower, or the Moretti Grand, or whichever room Roman was occupying tonight, someone had looked at Emily's departure and decided to call it a problem that needed managing. Emily stared at the ceiling. She had thought leaving was the hardest part. She was beginning to understand it was only the beginning. The gossip column's notification glowed on the ceiling in Emily's mind long after she put the phone face down. She didn't sleep much. She lay on her side the way the midwife had told her to. Left side, always left, better circulation, with a pillow wedged under the weight of her stomach and another between her knees, and she stared at the wall and listened to the building settle around her, and thought about the phrase custody implications with the obsessive precision of someone who had been handed a threat wrapped in neutral language. She had not considered that angle. Not seriously. Roman had not called to threaten her. His lawyers had not said anything about custody. But someone with access to Roman Moretti had planted that language in a gossip column, and language like that didn't appear by accident. It appeared by design. It appeared because someone wanted her to read it at 11 o'clock at night, while she was alone in a borrowed guest room, and understand, without being told directly, that she was not as free as she thought she was. By 6 in the morning, she was dressed and sitting at Nadia's kitchen table with a glass of water and the legal pad she'd found in the junk drawer, writing down everything she needed. An attorney. Not one Roman knew. Not one anyone in his circle had ever recommended. A clearer picture of her finances. The separate account she'd maintained was solid but not infinite, and she needed to understand exactly what she had before she made any decisions about where to go next. A new phone, maybe. She didn't know how much she was willing to trust her current one. Nadia came out of her bedroom at 6:40, still in scrubs from the night shift, and stopped in the kitchen doorway. She looked at Emily. She looked at the legal pad. She went to the coffee maker without saying anything and started a pot. "You didn't sleep," Nadia said. "Not much. You need to sleep." "I need an attorney." Nadia poured water into the reservoir. "I know someone. She handled my cousin's divorce. She's not fancy, but she's smart and she doesn't lose. Does she know the Moretti name? Everyone in New York knows the Moretti name. I mean, is she afraid of it?" Nadia looked at her over her shoulder. "No." "Then give me her number." The attorney's name was Patricia Osei. She had an office in Midtown on the 14th floor of a building that had seen better decades, and she met Emily 2 days later in a room with a window that looked directly into the side of another building and a desk stacked with folders that suggested she was working on approximately 40 things simultaneously and managing all of them. She was 50-something, compact, with reading glasses pushed up into close-cropped hair, in the manner of someone who had heard every version of every marital catastrophe and had retained her capacity for clarity by refusing to retain her capacity for shock. She read the divorce petition while Emily sat across from her. She read it slowly, twice, and then she set it down and looked at Emily over her glasses. "The filing is clean," she said, "which means expensive lawyers who've done this before. They'll push for a quick, uncontested resolution." "I know. The confidentiality clause in the original marriage contract is broad, unusually broad." She tapped the page. "You signed this." "I was 28 and in love, and his family's attorneys told me it was standard." "It's not standard." Patricia set the page down. It covers anything you observed or participated in or were told about during the marriage related to, and I'm quoting, business operations, associates, transactions, and related matters of the Moretti family enterprise and its affiliated interests. Which covers everything. Which covers everything. Patricia took her glasses off. How much do you actually know? Emily held her gaze. Enough. Specifically, enough to be inconvenient, not enough to be dangerous. She paused. Or that's what I thought. Patricia nodded slowly. The confidentiality agreement they brought you, the new one, you didn't sign it. No. Good. Don't. The existence of a second agreement tells me they're worried about something specific, not just covering general liability. Emily's hands were flat on the table. Still. What do they want? My read? A quiet resolution. You disappear, you take the money, you raise the baby under a cloud of Moretti goodwill and their financial support, and nobody talks about anything. Patricia paused. The public engagement changes their calculation. Victoria Sinclair's family has significant stakes in legitimate financial sectors. The last thing Roman Moretti needs right now is a public custody dispute drawing attention to the marriage he apparently forgot to mention. He didn't forget, Emily said. He just thought I would go away. Patricia looked at her for a long moment. Will you? No. Then we have work to do, he said. Roman showed up on a Thursday. Emily had been back at Nadia's apartment for 11 days by then, had met with Patricia twice, had spoken to her parents every evening, and had started the remote grant coordination work Gabriel had offered. Small tasks, reviewing applications, writing responses, work that required actual attention and gave her mind somewhere useful to be for a few hours each day. She heard the knock and knew before she reached the door. Not because she expected him, but because the knock had a particular quality to it. Not Nadia's knock, which was a single firm rap, not the super's knock, which was apologetic by nature, but the kind of knock that expected to be opened. She opened the door. Roman stood in the hallway in a dark coat, no tie, looking like a man who had not been sleeping well. His jaw was unshaved by 2 or 3 days. His eyes were the same eyes they had always been, dark, direct, with a capacity for focus that she had once found compelling and now found exhausting. He was carrying nothing. He had not brought flowers or papers or lawyers. He had just brought himself, which in its own way was the most aggressive thing he could have done. No, Emily said. I'm not asking to come in. Then why are you standing in the doorway? Because I needed to see you. His voice was level, not soft, not combative. Level, which was Roman at his most controlled. I needed to see that you were... I'm fine, she said. Charlotte is fine. We're both fine. You don't need to verify that in person. He looked at her stomach. She put one hand on the doorframe, not blocking the entrance exactly, but making the boundary physical and visible. Roman, the announcement was not what it looked like. You told me what it looked like in a text message. I read it. Then you know it was a strategic... I know what you said it was. Her voice did not rise. That was the thing she had learned in years of marriage to a man who treated volume as leverage. That not rising to it was its own kind of power, and that it cost her, quietly, every time she did it. I also know that you filed divorce papers without calling me first. That you had lawyers deliver them to me in your brother's girlfriend's apartment. That someone from your organization called a gossip column and used the words custody implications. Something moved across his face. Not guilt exactly. Roman's face was not built for uncomplicated guilt, but something adjacent to it, a tightening around the eyes. That wasn't me, he said. I know. Emily, who was it? He was quiet for a beat too long. Roman. Who planted that story? It's being handled. That's not an answer. It's the answer I can give you right now. She looked at him for a long time, at the man she had married and mourned and loved in the specific, exhausting way you love something that keeps costing you. At the father of the daughter currently making small, deliberate movements in her lower abdomen as if to remind her that she was not alone in this conversation. You should go, Emily said. I want to be there when she's born. The words landed with a flatness that surprised her. Not because they were cruel, but because they were, apparently, sincere. She hadn't expected sincerity. She had been braced for management. That's not your decision to make, she said. She's my daughter. She is. And you will have whatever relationship with her that serves her best when she's here. But right now, I am the one keeping her alive, and I am the one who watched your engagement announcement on a television screen while I was listening to her heartbeat, and I am the one who does not currently owe you access to anything. She stepped back from the door frame. Good night, Roman. She closed the door. She stood in the hallway of Nadia's apartment with her back against the door and her hand pressed flat against her sternum and breathed. In through the nose, out through the mouth, the way the breathing instructor at the prenatal class had taught. The one she'd been attending alone on Tuesday mornings, sitting in a circle of mostly coupled women. After a moment, she heard his footsteps in the hallway, moving away. She stayed against the door until she heard the elevator. Gabriel called the next morning. He came to see you, he said. Not a question. Yes. Are you all right? I'm fine. She was at the kitchen table again, coffee in hand, the legal pad. It had become a kind of morning practice. The list, the coffee, the organizing of what she knew and what she needed. How did you know? He told our mother. She called me. What did she say? She said, Gabriel paused. And in that pause, Emily could hear him selecting words with the same careful precision she had come to associate with him. She said that Roman is beginning to understand the size of what he's lost, and that she's concerned he'll respond to that understanding by trying to reclaim it rather than by sitting with it. Emily turned her coffee mug in her hands. Is she right? Usually, Gabriel said. What does that mean practically? It means watch your attorney's filings. If he tries to challenge the terms of your departure, frame it as abandonment, question your fitness, anything in that direction, you'll see it in the legal paperwork before you see it anywhere else. A pause. Patricia Osei is good. I've seen her work. You made the right call. Emily went still. You knew I hired her? A beat. Gabriel. She represented someone the Foundation worked with 2 years ago. I recognized her name when Roman mentioned it. Roman knows who my attorney is. He knows her name. He doesn't know your strategy. Emily set the mug down. The small, precise anger of someone who has learned to keep anger functional rather than expressive moved through her chest and settled. I need to know, she said, what you are in this. Clearly. What do you mean? I mean, you are Roman Moretti's brother. I mean, you work inside the family structure. I mean, when there is a conflict between what is good for me and what is good for your family, I need to know which way you fall. The silence that followed was not defensive. It was considered. Gabriel Moretti did not answer questions he hadn't thought about, and he didn't pretend to be thinking when he'd already decided. The family is my mother, he said finally. And you. And Charlotte, when she arrives. Roman made his choices. He doesn't get to claim family structure as a shield for them. A pause. If I ever give you reason to doubt that, you stop trusting me. Until then, I'm asking you to let me be useful. Emily looked out the window of Nadia's kitchen. The garden below, someone's backyard, a folding chair left out from the previous season, a tree coming into its first leaves. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. The call from Patricia came on a Friday afternoon, and the quality of her voice, measured but with an edge underneath that Emily had not heard in their previous meetings, told Emily before the words did that something had changed. They filed an amended motion this morning, Patricia said, challenging the voluntary nature of your departure from the marital home. They're characterizing it as unilateral abandonment without cause and using it to lay groundwork for a custody arrangement that would limit your decision-making authority. Emily sat down. She was in the small office nook Gabriel had set up for her remote foundation work, laptop open, a half-reviewed grant application on the screen. She sat down and put one hand on the desk and looked at the application without seeing it. On what basis? She said. They're citing instability of living situation, the fact that you moved to a friend's apartment without establishing a formal residence. They're going to argue that Charlotte needs a stable home environment and that the Moretti family can provide. I have a home, Emily said. My parents' home in Vermont. I've been making arrangements to. I know, and that matters. But Emily, Patricia paused. There's more. Emily closed the laptop. The amended motion includes a request for a psychological evaluation. Mandatory, if the judge approves. They're suggesting that the stress of the pregnancy combined with what they're characterizing as erratic behavior following a difficult medical history may indicate my medical history. Emily's voice had gone very quiet. They're using my miscarriages. The silence on the line was answer enough. They have access to records they should not have access to, Emily said. That's a separate issue we can pursue. Patricia. She pressed the heel of her hand against her forehead. They are using 3 years of loss as evidence that I am unfit. They are taking the worst things that ever happened to me and filing them as exhibits. Yes, Patricia said. I know, and I want you to hear this clearly. It is a tactic. It is designed to destabilize you, to cost you money, to make you exhausted enough to settle. It does not mean they will succeed. A pause. But I need you to tell me something, and I need the honest answer. Ask. Is there anything at all that they could find or use or manufacture that would give a family court judge in this jurisdiction reason to question your judgment? Anything in your background, your history, your behavior during the marriage that wasn't clean? Emily thought about it, not defensively, clinically, the way Patricia was asking. No, she said. I was a good wife to a man who didn't deserve it, that's all. Good! Patricia's voice settled back into its operational steadiness. Then we fight. Us, Eleanor Moretti called that evening. Emily almost didn't answer that one either, for different reasons. Eleanor was not a soft woman. She had not survived 40 years in proximity to the Moretti organization by being soft. She was precise and perceptive, and she loved her children with a ferocity that had not always expressed itself in ways that were legible as love. And Emily had spent 3 years trying to read her, and had never been entirely certain she had succeeded. But Eleanor had seen the engagement announcement on television, and Eleanor had raised both of her sons, and Emily suspected that whatever she felt about Roman right now was something she was not able to say to him directly. Emily, she said. Her voice was older than it had been a year ago, or maybe Emily was only now hearing it accurately. Eleanor, I want to say something that I should have said a long time ago. A pause. I knew my son was not capable of giving you what you needed. I watched him fail you in ways that were visible, and I did not say anything because I told myself it was not my place. Emily waited. It was my place, Eleanor said. He is my son. What he does is partly my responsibility. I should have said that sooner. You're saying it now. I'm saying it now. A breath. The attorneys. The amended motion. I did not authorize that. Roman did not tell me. I found out this afternoon. Her voice had a controlled quality that Emily recognized as Eleanor's version of barely contained fury. I have made my position clear to him. What does your position do exactly? Emily said. Practically. It does what a mother's position does, Eleanor said, which is limited but not nothing. Emily leaned back in the chair. The baby moved, that flutter, that small, insistent reminder. Eleanor, what do you actually want from this call? A pause. Then, with a directness that Emily had always respected even when it cut against her, I want to help you. Not the Moretti way, not the managing a problem way. I want to help you because Charlotte is my granddaughter and because you deserved better from my family. Another breath. There is a townhouse in Brooklyn. It belongs to me, not to the family trust. I bought it before I married into this name, and I kept it in my own name because I am not entirely foolish. A beat. It's empty. It has 3 bedrooms. It has a garden. It is yours for as long as you need it, with no conditions and no Moretti strings attached. Emily stared at the wall. Why? She said. Because, Eleanor said, you need a stable home of record before your next court date, and because that townhouse has been empty for 6 years, and it deserves someone living in it who actually intends to make it a home. The offer sat in the room like something with real weight. Emily thought about Patricia's voice, instability of living situation, the amended motion, custody, the word psychological evaluation moving through her mind like something with teeth. She thought about Charlotte. She thought about what it meant to accept help from the family of the man who had done this to her, and whether the distinction between Eleanor and Roman was real or convenient, and whether it mattered right now, and whether the most honest answer was that sometimes you took what was offered and sorted out the rest later because the alternative was worse. I'll need to speak to Patricia first, Emily said. Of course. And I'm not signing anything that has the Moretti name in it without her review. I would expect nothing less, Eleanor said. There was something in her voice, not quite warmth, not quite approval, but the particular register of a woman recognizing someone who has decided to stop apologizing for being careful. Call me after you speak with her. Emily hung up and sat in the quiet for a long moment. Outside, the Brooklyn evening was doing its ordinary thing: traffic, voices, the distant sound of something being built or torn down. In this city, it was sometimes impossible to tell the difference. She picked up her phone and called Patricia. And Patricia, after hearing the offer, after a silence of several seconds during which Emily could hear her thinking through the implications with the rapid efficiency of someone who had seen this kind of complexity before, said, "Take it. But Emily, before you move, before you sign anything, before you tell Roman or his lawyers where you're going." "I know," Emily said. "There's something else." Patricia's voice shifted. "Something that came across my desk this afternoon through a contact at the courthouse. It's about Victoria Sinclair." Emily went still. "What about her?" "There's a sealed financial complaint, filed 6 weeks ago by the SEC. I can't get details yet, but the account numbers referenced in the preliminary summary." Patricia paused. "Emily, the account numbers overlap with transactions that appear in the Moretti family's legitimate holdings. If this opens, it changes Roman's exposure. It changes everything," Patricia said. "And if Victoria Sinclair knew about those accounts when she entered the engagement, the sentence didn't need finishing." Emily sat in the dark of the small office nook and felt the specific vertigo of a situation that had been moving in one direction suddenly revealing that it had been moving in several directions simultaneously, and that the ground she had been standing on was not the ground she had thought it was. Patricia said, "I need you to come in tomorrow morning, early, before 9. "I'll be there," Emily said. She put the phone down. The room was very quiet. Patricia's office at 8:15 in the morning had a different quality than it did at normal hours. The building half empty, the hallways without their daytime noise, the particular silence of a place that was about to become loud. Emily arrived 7 minutes early and found Patricia already at her desk with 2 coffees and a folder that was thicker than anything they had discussed before. Patricia did not offer pleasantries. She opened the folder. "The SEC complaint is real," she said. "My contact got me enough to work with. Victoria Sinclair, through 3 shell companies registered in Delaware and 1 in the Caymans, has been systematically moving money through accounts that are commingled with Moretti legitimate business interests." She slid a printed summary across the desk. "The amounts are significant. We're talking about a pattern of transactions over 14 months. Emily looked at the summary without touching it. Roman knew. "That's the question." Patricia leaned back. "There are 2 possibilities. Either Roman knew and the engagement was partly a mechanism to legitimize the financial relationship, give it a personal cover story that made the account co-mingling look like ordinary shared finances between engaged partners." She paused. "Or Roman didn't know. And Victoria Sinclair spent 14 months embedding herself in his financial structure specifically to access it, and the engagement was the endgame of that access. Which do you think?" "I think," Patricia said carefully, "that Roman Moretti did not get to where he is by being naive about money. But I also think that men who are accustomed to being the most dangerous person in any room sometimes fail to recognize danger when it arrives wearing a good dress." Emily thought about Roman's face at the announcement. That practiced public smile. The particular quality of a man performing confidence for a camera. "If this opens," Emily said, "if the SEC pursues it, what happens to the amended custody motion? It complicates their position significantly. A father under active federal financial investigation does not make a strong argument for superior custodial stability." Patricia's voice was level. "But Emily, it also means the situation around you becomes more volatile. Roman under legal pressure is not the same as Roman in control. And people around him, people with exposure, may start making decisions that are not predictable." Emily sat with that. "There's something else," Patricia said. She slid a second document across the desk. This one was not a legal summary. It was a photograph, printed from what appeared to be a surveillance image, grainy, time-stamped, the angle of a camera positioned above and to the left of its subject. Emily picked it up. The photograph showed a man she did not recognize entering what appeared to be a parking structure. The timestamp was 3 weeks prior. The man was carrying a folder. I don't know this person, Emily said. His name is Derek Holt. He's a paralegal at Hargrove's firm. Patricia's voice had gone very quiet. He was seen entering a building on 6th Avenue 3 weeks ago. The building houses, among other tenants, the offices of a private investigator named Carl Russo. She paused. Carl Russo has done work for the Moretti organization before. Surveillance, background research, that kind of thing. Emily set the photograph down. They had someone watching me before the lawyers even came to Nadia's apartment, she said. Before the announcement aired, Patricia said, the timestamp predates the engagement announcement by 9 days. The room was very quiet. Emily looked at the photograph, at the grainy shape of a man carrying a folder into a building. 9 days before the announcement, which meant that whatever Roman had been planning, the surveillance of Emily had been part of it from the beginning, which meant the announcement had not been a mistake or a miscalculation. It had been a managed transition, and Emily had been a variable to be monitored and contained, not a person to be told. She had known this. In the part of herself that had been quietly preparing for 2 years, she had known this. But knowing something and seeing its evidence printed on paper and placed in your hands were different experiences, and the distance between them opened in Emily's chest like something with an edge. What do I do with this? She said. Right now? Nothing. We note it, we document it, we use it if and when we need to. Patricia looked at her directly. What you do today is go look at Eleanor's townhouse and decide whether you want to live there. Because your next court date is in 6 weeks, and I need your address to be something other than your friend's couch. Emily nodded. Once. She picked up her coffee. It had gone cold. She drank it anyway. The Brooklyn townhouse was on a quiet street in Carroll Gardens, 3 blocks from the coffee shop where she and Gabriel had first met. It was narrow and deep, the way Carroll Gardens brownstones were, with a front stoop worn smooth by decades of use, and a garden in the back that had gone to seed but still had the bones of something that had once been tended with real care. Eleanor met her there with a key, and no ceremony. She was smaller than Emily remembered, or perhaps Emily had always seen her through the distorting lens of what she represented. The Moretti matriarch, the woman at the center of the family's gravity, and now, standing on a quiet sidewalk in a coat that was expensive but not showy, she was just a woman in her 70s who had outlasted more than most people imagined. They did not hug. They stood on the stoop and Eleanor handed her the key and said, "Go through it, I'll wait here." Emily went through it alone. The rooms were empty and smelled like old air and dust, and the particular silence of a space that has been closed too long. The floors were hardwood, scarred in places, good in others. The kitchen was outdated but functional. The second bedroom caught the afternoon light in a way that stopped Emily in the doorway. A wide window, south-facing, the light moving across the empty floor in a long rectangle. She stood there for a moment and thought about a crib in the corner, and a mobile, and the specific quality of light that a child's room needed to have. She went back downstairs. Eleanor was on the front stoop, standing very straight, looking at the street. "It needs work," Emily said. "It needs someone in it," Eleanor said. "The work is secondary." Emily looked at her, at the precise set of her spine, at the way she was holding herself with the particular quality of a woman who had rehearsed this conversation and was now living it and finding it harder than she had expected. "Did you know?" Emily said. "About Victoria Sinclair before the announcement." Eleanor was quiet for 3 seconds exactly. "I knew Roman was under pressure," she said. "I knew the alliance being discussed had financial dimensions I was not fully informed about. I did not know the announcement was coming when it came." A pause. "I did not know about you in the examination room." "But you knew something was coming." "I suspected." Eleanor's voice was flat and honest. "And I said nothing because I have spent 40 years in this family saying not enough. And I am trying at this late point to do better." She turned to look at Emily directly. "That is not an excuse." "No," Emily said, "it's not." "I know." They stood on the stoop in the thin March light, and the street went about its business around them, and Emily held the key in her hand and thought about what it cost to accept something from someone who owed you more than they could give, and whether the cost was prohibitive or just real. "I'll take it," Emily said. "Patricia will contact your attorney about the documentation." "Of course." Emily turned to go, then stopped. "Eleanor." She didn't turn back. If Roman tries to use this, the townhouse, your involvement, any of it, against me in the custody proceeding, if it becomes a way to claim I'm living in a Moretti property and therefore under Moretti influence, it won't, Eleanor said. How can you be sure? Because if he tries, Eleanor said, in the voice of a woman who had survived 40 years by knowing exactly where her leverage was, I will testify on your behalf. Emily turned then. Eleanor's expression was not soft. It was not maternal in any comfortable sense. It was the expression of a woman who had made a decision and was telling someone else about it in terms that were precise and final. Okay, Emily said. She went down the stoop and walked back toward the subway, and the key was cold in her hand and she held it anyway. She moved into the townhouse 9 days later. Gabriel helped her move. He arrived at Nadia's apartment at 8 in the morning with a rented van and no particular fanfare, and carried boxes down 4 flights of stairs for 3 hours without being asked twice about anything. He did not talk much while they worked, which Emily had come to understand as one of his qualities rather than a deficit. Gabriel filled silences with presence rather than words, which was its own kind of communication. Nadia helped until noon when she had to leave for her shift, and she hugged Emily at the door of the van with the particular fierceness of someone who had housed a person through the worst weeks of her life and was only now releasing her. Call me, Nadia said. Always, Emily said. The townhouse took shape slowly over the following week. Emily was 30 weeks pregnant by then, 10 weeks to go, give or take, and her body had reached the stage where it made decisions without consulting her about things like lower back pain and the necessity of sitting down every 40 minutes. She worked in short bursts, arranging the bedroom first, then the kitchen, then the second room that would be Charlotte's. The mobile she had ordered arrived on the 3rd day. She assembled it herself, sitting cross-legged on the floor of the second bedroom in the afternoon light, with the instructions spread around her and a stubbornness that she recognized as not entirely practical but necessary, because some things she needed to build with her own hands. Gabriel came by on the 4th evening with food, takeout from a Thai place he knew, enough for 2, nothing asked or assumed. And they sat at the kitchen table that was the one piece of furniture Emily had taken from the penthouse, and ate, and talked about the foundation work, and didn't talk about Roman, and Emily noticed that the quality of silence between them had changed from the early careful silences of their coffee shop meetings into something less managed and more ordinary. She noticed it and put it aside. There were too many things in motion for her to examine anything that didn't require immediate attention. Patricia called on a Wednesday with 2 pieces of news. The first was that the judge had denied the request for a mandatory psychological evaluation. Insufficient basis. Their motion had been rejected cleanly, which meant Roman's attorneys had overreached and the judge had seen it. The second piece of news landed differently. The SEC complaint went from sealed to active this morning, Patricia said. Victoria Sinclair's attorneys have confirmed she is cooperating with the investigation, which means she is giving them names and account numbers and transaction histories in exchange for whatever deal she's negotiating. A pause. Emily. The transactions they're examining, some of them are from the period of your marriage. Some of them involve accounts that Roman opened jointly with you. Emily sat down. I didn't have access to those accounts, she said immediately. Roman managed all of it. I know. And we'll document that. But your name is on 2 of the accounts, and the investigators will want to speak to you. Patricia's voice was steady, professional, giving Emily the facts without the panic. This is manageable. You are a witness, not a target, but I need you to understand that the situation has become significantly more complicated in the last 12 hours. Emily pressed her palm flat on the kitchen table, breathed. When do they want to speak to me? They've requested a voluntary interview next week. We'll prepare thoroughly. You tell them exactly what you knew, which is very little, and exactly what you didn't know, which is nearly everything. A pause. Emily, are you all right? She looked around this kitchen. The table from the penthouse, the takeout containers from last night that she hadn't thrown away yet, the key on the hook by the door, the one Eleanor had handed her on the stoop. I'm 30 weeks pregnant, and my name is on federal financial accounts that I didn't know existed, and my husband is engaged to the woman who apparently created them, she said. Define all right. Fair point, Patricia said. I'll send you the prep materials tonight. After she hung up, Emily sat at the table for a long time. She thought about Roman opening those accounts, about the paperwork he'd brought home occasionally, Sign here, initial here, standard trust restructuring. It's fine, the attorneys handle it. And she had signed because she trusted him, or because she had still been in the process of learning how much not to trust him, and the two states had overlapped for longer than she wanted to admit. She thought about her name on those documents. She thought about the SEC investigator who would sit across from her next week and ask her what she knew. The thing she kept coming back to was not fear exactly. It was the particular feeling of discovering that the ground you thought you had left behind was still connected to the ground you were standing on. That you could walk away from a marriage, leave the penthouse, establish a new address, begin a new life, and still be bound to the old one by paperwork you signed in good faith and a name you shared and decisions you had no part in making. She went upstairs. She lay down on her side. Charlotte moved with her usual evening energy. Larger movements now, more defined, the kind that occasionally made Emily's breath catch because they felt so completely like a person. "I know," Emily said to her. "I know." Her phone buzzed. Not Patricia, not Gabriel, not her mother. Roman. She looked at his name on the screen. She thought about 9 days before the announcement. She thought about Carl Russo's building. She thought about her name on federal accounts. She answered. "Emily." His voice had something in it she hadn't heard before, not the controlled level of their hallway conversation. Something underneath it. Something that sounded improbably like a man who had run out of levers. "I know about the accounts," she said. "Don't waste time." A silence. "I need to talk to you," he said. "Not through attorneys, in person." "No." "Emily." "Victoria. I know what Victoria did. My attorney is handling it." She kept her voice flat. "Whatever you need to say to me, say it to Patricia. This isn't about the legal. Everything between us is about the legal right now. That's what you made it when you sent Hargrove to Nadia's apartment." "I know." His voice cracked slightly on those two words. Slightly. Roman Moretti did not crack. Not fully, not where anyone could observe it, but something in those two syllables had less of his usual architecture to it. "I know what I did." Emily closed her eyes. Opened them. "Roman, what do you want?" "I want you to know that the accounts—" "I didn't know she had access to the joint ones. That wasn't—" He stopped. "It wasn't part of anything I agreed to." "So she used you." The silence that followed told her everything. Victoria Sinclair, who had spent 14 months embedding herself in the Moretti financial structure, who had created shell companies and moved money through accounts she wasn't supposed to touch, had done it from the inside. From the position of trusted fiancé, from the position that Roman had created by deciding that Emily was expendable and a strategic alliance was preferable. Emily felt something move through her that was not quite satisfaction and not quite grief. Something more complicated. The feeling of a trap closing on someone who had set a different trap first. "The investigators," she said. "They're going to find everything." "Yes." "Your organization's exposure." "Yes." "And you're telling me this because your name is on 2 accounts, and I need you to know that I will tell them, directly, on record, that you had no knowledge of any transactions, that I managed those accounts exclusively, that your signature was obtained for routine restructuring that I represented to you as—" He stopped again. "I will tell them the truth, about your involvement, which was none." Emily sat with that. It was the right thing. It was what he owed her. It was also, she understood clearly, not purely altruistic. Roman telling the truth about Emily's uninvolvement also served his own narrative about what Victoria had done to him. It was the right thing, and it was also useful, which was how Roman Moretti always operated, even when he was doing something decent. "Fine," she said. "Emily?" "Good night, Roman." She ended the call. She put the phone on the nightstand. She lay in the dark of the townhouse that belonged to his mother and pressed her hand against her stomach and thought about what Patricia would say tomorrow and what the investigators would ask next week, and what it meant that the most feared man in New York had just called her from whatever room he was in, sounding like someone whose empire was beginning to understand its own weight. And then Charlotte kicked, sharp and definitive, a movement that felt less like a flutter and more like a statement. And Emily exhaled slowly and turned onto her side and tried to find whatever version of sleep was available to a woman 30 weeks into the most complicated year of her life. She was almost there when the sound reached her. Not loud, not the dramatic crash of something breaking, just the specific sound of the front door of the townhouse. The door she had locked herself, she was certain of it. She was always certain of it now. Opening. Emily was upright before the sound finished. Her hand found the phone. She sat completely still in the dark bedroom and listened to the quality of the silence below and tried to determine whether what she had heard was real or the specific paranoia of a woman who had spent 3 months learning how many ways she could be reached. Then she heard footsteps on the stairs. Not hurried, not trying to be quiet, coming up with the deliberate, unhurried confidence of someone who had a key or who had never needed one to knock. Emily's thumb was already on the phone screen, Gabriel's name. She pressed call and held the phone against her ear and stood in the dark bedroom doorway at the top of the stairs and waited. 1 ring. The footsteps stopped at the bottom of the staircase. "Emily?" A woman's voice, low, controlled, and carrying the particular quality of someone who had rehearsed the moment but not fully anticipated the resistance. "I'm not here to hurt you." 2 rings. Emily's hand found the light switch. She flipped it. The upstairs hallway went bright, and she squinted against it and looked down the staircase. Victoria Sinclair stood at the bottom of the stairs. She was not what the photographs suggested. The photographs had shown architecture, the deliberate construction of a woman designed to be looked at. What stood at the bottom of Emily's staircase was something underneath the architecture. Makeup still present, but not fresh. Dark coat, dark clothes, hair pulled back without ceremony. She was holding nothing. Her hands were visible and empty, which Emily noted the way she had learned to note everything, quickly, practically, without pausing to feel it yet. Gabriel answered on the 3rd ring. "Emily, I need you," Emily said. She kept her eyes on Victoria. "Now, the address." A beat of silence, then, 20 minutes. "Okay." She didn't hang up. She put the phone in her left hand, screen down, call still live. Victoria had not moved. "How did you get a key?" Emily said. "I didn't." Victoria looked up the stairs with an expression that was not apologetic and not aggressive, something more exhausted than either. "The lock on your garden door is a Medico 4000. They're good locks. They're not perfect locks." "You picked my lock." "Yes." "You're a financial criminal who picks locks," Emily said. "That's a broader skill set than I expected." Something moved across Victoria's face. Not quite a smile. The ghost of one, quickly suppressed. "I need to talk to you. You need to leave my house." "I will. After." Victoria put one hand on the newel post at the bottom of the staircase. Not climbing, just steadying. She looked tired in a way that the photographs had never suggested she was capable of. "I know about the accounts. I know you're scheduled to talk to the investigators. I know what they're going to ask you." "Then you know I have nothing to tell them. You have more than you think." Victoria's voice was still controlled, but something underneath it had a different quality. A compression, like pressure finding its edge. "The transactions in the joint accounts, the ones with your name on them, the investigators are going to present them to you as evidence of commingled funds. They're going to suggest that the restructuring you signed off on was designed specifically to route money through a joint account to give it a legitimate source." Emily didn't move. "Was it?" "No." Victoria held her gaze. "I used those accounts without Roman's knowledge or yours. I had access because I was embedded in his financial structure for 14 months. The routing through the joint accounts was my decision, not his, and not anything either of you authorized." A pause. "I'm telling the investigators that. It's in my cooperation agreement." "Then why are you here?" "Because there's a document." Victoria's voice dropped slightly. "A transfer authorization. It was signed 14 months ago, during the period when Roman and I were first negotiating the business relationship. Before the engagement, before any of the personal arrangement." She paused. "It authorizes a transfer of administrative access on the joint accounts to a designated representative of the Sinclair family holdings." Emily felt the cold move through her. "Roman signed that," she said. "Roman signed something he was told was a standard access authorization for coordination between family offices. His attorneys drafted it as a routine document." Victoria's hands were steady on the newel post. But the language, when read carefully, and the investigators are reading it very carefully, could be interpreted to suggest that Roman knowingly granted access to accounts he shared with you without informing you as part of a deliberate arrangement, which would make him complicit, which would make him look complicit. Whether he was or wasn't, the document exists and it has his signature. A beat. And it has yours. Emily's hand tightened on the phone. Mine, she said. Page 4. Initials APSOL. Standard restructuring package, the way Roman always described it to you. His attorneys put it in a packet with 8 other documents, and you initiated it as routine. The kitchen table, the pen. Sign here, initial here. Standard trust restructuring. She could see it. The specific evening. She had been tired. She had been in the second trimester's early fog. Roman had set the packet in front of her and said it was the 3rd time the attorneys had asked, and she had signed because she trusted and because she was still, at that point, 3/4 of the way to believing in the life she thought they were building. Her initials. On page 4. Of a document that could be read as authorizing Victoria Sinclair's access to accounts held jointly in Emily's name. They're going to argue, Victoria said quietly, that you and Roman together authorized the arrangement, that it was a family decision, that the joint nature of the accounts and your initials on the authorization make you a knowing participant. That's not what happened. I know that. Then, what I know and what a federal investigator can argue from a document are different things. Victoria's voice had gone very flat, informational, the voice of someone delivering a damage assessment. I'm cooperating. I'm giving them everything, but the one thing I cannot fully undo is your initials on that page, because I didn't put them there, and neither did Roman's attorneys as forgery. You put them there. Emily sat down on the top stair. Not a decision. Her legs made the decision. She sat on the top stair with the phone in her hand and the call to Gabriel still live, and the bright hallway light making everything sharp and shadowless, and she looked at Victoria Sinclair at the bottom of the stairs and thought about what it meant to have been used this thoroughly. Not by Roman, not primarily, by the paperwork, by the architecture of a life she had been living inside without ever being shown the blueprints. What do you want from me? Emily said. A statement. Victoria reached into her coat pocket and produced a folded document. She set it on the bottom stair. My attorneys drafted it. It's a voluntary declaration from you confirming that your initials on page 4 of the restructuring package were obtained by misrepresentation, that you were not informed of the nature of the access authorization, and that you received no benefit from any transactions conducted under that authorization. She took her hand away from the document. If you sign it, my cooperation agreement uses it to establish the misrepresentation chain. Your initials become evidence of how the scheme worked rather than evidence of your participation in it. And if I don't sign, then the document exists as it is, and the investigators draw whatever inference a document draws when it has your name on it and no accompanying explanation. Emily looked at the folded document on the bottom stair. She looked at Victoria Sinclair's face, the exhausted, stripped-down face of a woman who had built something elaborate and watched it come apart and was now engaged in the less glamorous work of damage control. You should have told me you were coming, Emily said. You would have had your attorney here. Yes. I needed to talk to you without attorneys. That's not your call to make. Emily's voice was even. None of this was your call to make. You came into my marriage. You used my name on a document I didn't understand. She stopped, the phone in her hand, Gabriel listening. She was not going to do this on a staircase at 11 o'clock at night while 30 weeks pregnant. Get out of my house. The document? Leave it. Get out. I'll have Patricia contact your attorneys in the morning. Victoria looked at her for a long moment. Whatever she had expected, it appeared this was not quite it. Then she nodded once, the nod of a woman recalibrating, and she turned and walked toward the back of the house where she had come in. Emily heard the garden door. A click. Silence. She sat on the top stair for another minute. Then she raised the phone to her ear. Gabriel? I'm 4 minutes away, he said immediately. Are you all right? Is she gone? She's gone. Emily put her hand on the stair beside her. The wood was solid, real, present. I'm okay. Come anyway. I'm coming. Man. Gabriel arrived in 3 minutes, not 4. He came in through the front door with a key Eleanor had given him for emergencies, and he went through the ground floor quickly, checking the garden door, checking the lock, and then he came upstairs and found Emily still sitting on the top stair with the document in her hands, reading it. He sat down beside her on the stair. He did not ask if she was all right again. He looked at the document. "Patricia," he said, "in the morning. Tonight. Call her tonight. This is too important to wait." Emily looked at him. His face in the hallway light was calm and serious and entirely focused on her in the particular way she had come to understand as Gabriel's version of urgency. Not loud, not dramatic, just absolutely present. "Okay," she said. She called Patricia at 11:40 at night, and Patricia answered on the second ring like a woman who had been half expecting the call. Emily described the visit, all of it. The lock, the document, the initials, the declaration Victoria had left on the stair. Patricia was quiet through all of it. Then, "Don't sign anything tonight." "I wasn't going to." "Photograph the document and send it to me, every page." Emily did it while they were on the phone, Gabriel holding the flashlight on his phone to supplement the hallway light. The document spread flat on the floor while Emily photographed each page carefully. "I'll have read this by 6 a.m., Patricia said. "Come in at 8. "Okay." "Emily." Patricia's voice had the flat, professional steadiness Emily had come to trust, like a handhold on a rock face. "This is manageable. Your initials on a routine restructuring document are not the same as financial complicity. Misrepresentation can be established. It will cost us time, and it will cost you energy you don't have to spare right now, but it is manageable." A pause. "Go to sleep if you can." Emily hung up. She sat on the floor of the hallway with the document in her hands, and Gabriel sitting with his back against the wall, jacket still on, completely unhurried. "You don't have to stay," she said. "I know." He stayed. He slept on the couch. Emily knew because she came downstairs at 2 a.m. for water, and he was there, jacket folded over the armrest, shoes off, asleep on his side with the particular compactness of someone who had learned to sleep in inconvenient places without complaint. She stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at him for a moment, at the fact of him, the specific quality of a person who had said no conditions and had meant it, who had shown up every time without requiring anything in return. And she felt something move through her that she was not going to examine at 2 a.m. on a kitchen floor. She got her water and went back upstairs. Patricia's office at 8 a.m. had the document spread across the desk, annotated in red pen in Patricia's small, precise handwriting. "The declaration is legitimate," Patricia said. "Victoria's attorneys drafted it carefully. If you sign it and it's incorporated into her cooperation agreement, it does what she says. It establishes the misrepresentation chain and removes you from the inference of knowing participation." She tapped the page. "The problem is that it also requires you to make statements about Roman's knowledge of the authorization that are partially exculpatory for him." Emily frowned. Meaning if you declare that Roman presented the restructuring package to you as routine, and that neither of you understood the access authorization it contained, you are implicitly supporting a version of events in which Roman was also deceived by the document's language. Patricia looked at her directly. "Which may be true, but it also significantly reduces his exposure on the authorization question specifically. So signing helps me and partially helps Roman. Yes. And not signing leaves your initials on a problematic document without an accompanying declaration, which the investigators will use however serves their case, which may or may not be consistent with what actually happened." Patricia folded her hands on the desk. "My recommendation is to sign. Your protection is the priority, and the partial benefit to Roman is a side effect you don't control and shouldn't let determine your decision." She paused. "But it's your decision." Emily looked at the document, at the declaration that asked her to put her name to a version of events that was true, and also, incidentally, gave Roman Moretti a partial lifeline. She thought about Roman on the phone. "I will tell them the truth, about your involvement," which was none. She thought about him sending Hargrove to Nadia's apartment, about custody implications in a gossip column at 11 o'clock at night, about her name on accounts she didn't know the contents of. She thought about the fact that he was the father of her daughter, and that Charlotte would spend her life knowing that Emily had a choice about how to handle this, and had made a specific one. She picked up the pen. She signed. The days after the signing had a particular quality. the specific silence that follows a decision that cannot be unmade. Emily moved through them with the mechanical efficiency she had developed over the previous months. Foundation work in the mornings, prenatal appointments twice a week. The Brooklyn townhouse slowly becoming something that felt, if not yet like home, then at least like somewhere she had chosen. Gabriel came by on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Sometimes he brought food. Sometimes he just came and sat at the kitchen table and worked on foundation business on his laptop while Emily worked on hers. The silence between them had continued its evolution from careful to ordinary and was beginning to develop a quality that Emily noticed and did not name. She was 33 weeks pregnant when the SEC story broke publicly, not a leak. A full press release from the SEC's Enforcement Division. Victoria Sinclair, named in a 14-count complaint for securities fraud, wire fraud, and unauthorized access to financial accounts. The press release was careful and precise about what it alleged and what remained under investigation, but the names of the accounts and the entities involved were enough for the financial press to connect the dots to the Moretti organization within hours. Emily watched it on her laptop at the kitchen table. News sites updating in real time, headlines stacking on top of each other, the particular media frenzy that attended the public dismantling of something that had appeared from the outside to be solid. Roman's empire was not collapsing. Not yet. The Moretti organization had survived worse than federal scrutiny and had the lawyers and the financial architecture to weather a significant amount of exposure. But the legitimate business interests, the hotels, the development projects, the public-facing entities that Roman had spent years cultivating as the respectable face of the Moretti name, those were taking damage in real time as investors and partners began their own quiet reassessments. The engagement was over. Victoria Sinclair's attorneys confirmed it in a terse statement released at noon. Roman did not comment publicly. Emily closed the laptop and sat in the quiet kitchen and thought about a man she had loved and left and was still, in some molecular and infuriating way, connected to, through paperwork, through a daughter, through 3 years of a life built inside his gravitational field, and she tried to locate what she felt about watching his public position deteriorate and could not find a clean emotion. Only the complicated, adult, unglamorous thing, not satisfaction and not grief and not vindication. Just the exhausted recognition that consequences had arrived on their own schedule, the way they always do. Her phone rang. Her mother. "I saw the news," her mother said. "Yeah. Are you all right?" "I'm 33 weeks pregnant and I signed a federal declaration and I watched my ex-husband's engagement explode on the internet," Emily said. "I'm functional." Her mother was quiet for a moment. Then, "Come home after. When Charlotte's here and you're ready, come home." "I will," Emily said. "I promise." After she hung up, she sat for a while longer. The afternoon light through the kitchen window. The townhouse settling around her with its old building sounds. The mobile she'd assembled upstairs, turning slightly in the draft from the heating vent. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost ignored it. Then she answered. "Mrs. Whitmore." A man's voice. Measured, professional, and carrying the particular careful neutrality she had learned to associate with federal investigators. "My name is Agent Reeves. I'm following up on your scheduled voluntary interview regarding—" "I know why you're calling," Emily said. "Contact my attorney, Patricia Osei. She handles all communication." A pause. "Of course. I also wanted to inform you, in advance of formal notification, that we received your declaration this morning. It's been incorporated into the cooperation agreement." Another pause. "We appreciate your cooperation, Mrs. Whitmore." "Miss," she said. "Whitmore." "Of course. Ms. Whitmore." A beat. "We'll be in touch through your attorney." She hung up. She pressed both hands flat on the kitchen table and breathed. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The baby moved. Not the small flutter of early weeks, but the large, definitive movement of a person who had run out of room and was making her presence known by force of will. "I know," Emily said. "I know, I know." She was still sitting there when she heard the knock at the front door. 2 knocks, firm and even. She recognized the knock before she reached the door. She opened it. Roman stood on the front stoop. He looked worse than he had in the hallway at Nadia's apartment. Not physically, he was still Roman, Still the particular quality of contained physical authority that had never left him. But something in his face had changed. The management had slipped. The practiced surface that she had spent years learning to read was thinner now. And what was underneath it was something she had rarely seen on him. Not anger, not calculation. Genuine wreckage. He looked at her, at the size of her now, 33 weeks, the swell of his daughter visible and undeniable. Something moved across his face that he did not control quickly enough. "I know I'm not supposed to be here," he said. "No. I know." He put one hand on the doorframe, not aggressive, not pushing, the gesture of a man bracing himself. "The engagement is over, you know that." "I saw." "The investigation." "Roman." Her voice was flat and careful. "If you came here to manage something, go. I'm done being managed." "I didn't come to manage anything." His voice had none of its usual architecture. It was just his voice. Low, unguarded, and carrying something that she had waited 3 years to hear. And now, hearing it, was not certain she had wanted it as badly as she had thought. "I came because I don't have anywhere else to go. Because the only honest thing I've done in the last year is tell a federal investigator that my wife had nothing to do with my mistakes." He stopped, swallowed. "And she's not even my wife anymore. Or she won't be." Emily stood in the doorway with 33 weeks of his daughter between them and looked at the man who had broken her comprehensively and efficiently and was now standing on her stoop with the particular quality of someone who had run out of versions of himself to present. "What do you want me to say?" she said. "Nothing." He shook his head. "I don't want you to say anything. He looked at her stomach. "I wanted to see you, both of you, before—" He stopped. Before what? He was quiet for a moment. The street behind him. The March light. Someone walking a dog half a block down. The ordinary texture of a city that continued regardless. "My attorneys got a call this morning," he said. "The investigation is moving faster than anyone expected. There's a grand jury." He said it evenly, factually, the way Roman delivered bad news, like directly, without softening, because he had always said that softening was a form of disrespect. "My exposure is significant. Not the accounts. Those are complicated but survivable. But there are other matters that the investigation is now adjacent to." He met her eyes. "I may not be available for a while." Emily heard what he wasn't saying. "How long?" she said. "I don't know yet." "Are you going to be there when Charlotte is born?" The question landed between them like something physical. Roman's jaw tightened. For the first time in the entire conversation, the control he had on his expression slipped completely. Just for a moment. Just for the space of a breath. And what she saw underneath it was something she would carry with her for a long time without being entirely sure what to do with it. "I don't know," he said. Emily looked at him for a long moment. Then she stepped back from the door. "Come in," she said. 10 minutes. He came in. He stood in the kitchen of the Brooklyn townhouse that belonged to his mother and looked at the table she had taken from the penthouse and the mobile parts scattered on the counter from where she'd been adjusting it, and the legal pad with its lists, and the photograph of Charlotte's 30-week ultrasound tacked to the wall above the coffee maker. He looked at it for a long time. "Her nose," he said. "I know. She's going to be—" He stopped. His hand came up to the back of his neck. "She's going to be something." "Yes," Emily said. "She is." They stood in the kitchen in the afternoon light, and the silence between them was not the silence of a marriage or the silence of a war, but something more complicated and more final. The silence of two people who had failed each other and were only now beginning to understand the full dimensions of the damage, and who shared, despite everything, the specific, undeniable fact of a person who did not yet exist outside a 33-week body, but who was already entirely real. "You should go," Emily said. "I know." He moved toward the door. Then he stopped with his hand on the frame, the same gesture as on the stoop, the bracing. And he said, without turning, "I'm going to be better, whatever it takes. When it's resolved, I'm going to be better." Emily looked at his back, at the dark coat, at the line of his shoulders. "For her sake," she said. "I hope so." He left. She stood in the kitchen and listened to his footsteps on the stoop, and then the silence after them. her hand on her stomach. Charlotte moving with her constant, indifferent, magnificent life. The front door was still open. Through it came the sound of the city, traffic and voices, and the particular layered noise of 10 million lives in motion. And underneath it, barely audible, the sound of a car engine starting and moving away from the curb. Emily walked to the door and closed it. She turned the deadbolt, then the second lock. Then she stood in the hallway of the townhouse that was beginning, slowly and against considerable odds, to become hers. And she thought about grand juries and cooperation agreements, and initials on page 4, and a man who had just told her he might not be there when his daughter was born, and she waited for the grief of it to arrive in its full weight. It came. She let it. She stood in her hallway and let it move through her the way things move through you when you stop managing them. Completely, without ceremony, taking everything with it. And then it passed. And she was still standing there. She went upstairs to the second bedroom. She sat on the floor in the afternoon light. She reached for the mobile she'd been adjusting and went back to work on it, her hand steady, the room quiet around her, the sound of the city outside the window continuous and indifferent, and in its own rough way, alive. Charlotte Rose Whitmore arrived at 3:47 in the morning on a Thursday in April, 7 weeks after Roman stood in the kitchen doorway and told Emily he might not be there. He wasn't there. Labor started at 11 the previous night, not the gradual, warning kind that the books described, but the sudden, serious kind that Emily's body had apparently decided was more efficient. She was alone in the townhouse when the first contraction hit hard enough to make her grip the bathroom sink with both hands. She stood there for 30 seconds, breathing the way the class had taught, and then she called 3 people in the following order: her mother, Nadia, and Gabriel. Her mother was in Vermont and said she was getting in the car immediately, which meant she would arrive sometime around 4 in the morning and not in time for any of what was about to happen. Nadia was finishing a shift and said she would meet her at the hospital. Gabriel answered on the first ring, already awake for reasons he didn't explain, and said, "I'm leaving now." He was at the townhouse in 11 minutes. Emily had the bag packed and waiting by the door. She had packed it at 32 weeks because she was not a woman who left that particular thing to chance. And Gabriel took it without comment and put one hand briefly on her shoulder blade as she locked the door, and that was the entirety of what needed to be said between them in that moment. The drive to Brooklyn Methodist was 14 minutes at midnight. Emily spent it in the front seat with her hand pressed flat on her knee and her eyes on the window and her breathing measured against the contractions that were coming every 6 minutes and then every 5. Gabriel drove with the particular focus of a man who had decided that this specific task was the only thing that existed in the world right now and who had the temperament to actually execute that decision. "Tell me something," Emily said between contractions. Something to occupy the space. Something to keep her inside the moment rather than ahead of it, where the fear lived. Gabriel was quiet for a beat. "When I was 8, he said, I broke my arm falling out of a tree in our backyard in Connecticut. It was a bad break. I could see the bone." He kept his eyes on the road. "My mother drove me to the hospital herself and held my hand the entire time, which she almost never did. She was not a physically demonstrative woman. And when it was over and they'd said it, and I asked her why she'd held my hand the whole time, she said, because some things you don't get through by being brave. You get through them by letting someone be there." Emily looked at him. Another contraction moved through her. She breathed through it. "Okay," she said. When it passed, "That's a good story." "I have a limited supply," he said. "I'm rationing." She almost laughed. She would think about that later. That she had almost laughed in a car at midnight, in labor, on the way to the hospital without the man who was technically still her husband, and she would understand it as one of the clearest indicators of who Gabriel Moretti actually was. Nadia was waiting at the entrance to labor and delivery with the specific authority of a nurse in her own hospital, which meant that the intake process moved at a pace that ordinary patients did not experience. Emily was assessed and admitted and in a room within 20 minutes. The labor lasted 14 hours. It was not graceful. It was not the softened, meaningful experience of certain kinds of storytelling. It was 14 hours of a body doing something enormous and unreasonable, while the mind alternated between the animal focus of pain and the strange suspended clarity that sometimes arrives alongside extremity. Emily cursed once, at hour 9, with a specificity and volume that made Nadia raise her eyebrows in professional appreciation. She held Nadia's hand for the last 2 hours. She cried once, briefly, around hour 11. Not from pain, but from the sudden particular grief of doing this without someone she had believed 3 years ago would be beside her. She did not cry for long. There wasn't room for it. Gabriel waited. He spent 14 hours in the waiting area outside labor and delivery, drinking coffee from the vending machine and working on his phone and pacing occasionally and sitting very still at other times. Nadia came out twice with updates. He did not ask questions beyond the necessary ones. At 3:47 a.m., Charlotte Rose Whitmore existed. She weighed 7 pounds and 2 ounces and had a significant amount of dark hair and a face that was doing the complicated work of deciding what it was going to be. She cried with immediate conviction. The sound of it went through Emily like electricity, like something that had been coiled waiting for that specific signal and had finally, completely released. When they put Charlotte on her chest, Emily pressed her cheek against her daughter's damp hair and closed her eyes and said nothing, because there was nothing that words were adequate for, and she had learned, in the year just finished, the difference between moments that required language and moments that required you to simply be inside them without translation. Nadia was crying. She denied it later. Emily saw it. Gabriel came in an hour after Charlotte was born. He knocked on the door frame, the same firm, even knock that Emily had come to know as specifically his, and waited. "Come in," Emily said. He came in. He looked at Charlotte in Emily's arms with the expression of a man who had been preparing himself for something and had found that no amount of preparation was actually adequate. He stood at the foot of the bed for a moment. "She has his nose," Nadia said, who was still in the corner and had made herself part of the furniture. "She has my grandmother's chin," Emily said. "The nose is negotiable." Gabriel moved closer. Emily looked at him and then looked down at Charlotte and then held her daughter out. He took her the way people take newborns when they understand the weight of what they're being handed, carefully, with both arms, with a completeness of attention that excluded everything else in the room. Charlotte's eyes were closed. Her small hands were closed into fists beside her face, the particular fierce compactness of a new person consolidating herself. Gabriel looked at her for a long time. "Hey," he said, quietly, to Charlotte. Just that. Emily watched him hold her daughter. She thought about the story in the car. Some things you don't get through by being brave. She thought about 11 minutes from a phone call. She thought about 14 hours in a waiting room with vending machine coffee. She thought about a man who had offered her a job when what she needed was a reason to be useful, who had moved boxes down 4 flights of stairs without being asked twice, who had slept on her couch without complaint and been upstairs making coffee when she came down in the morning. She thought about what it meant that the most natural thing in this room at 4:30 in the morning in a Brooklyn hospital was Gabriel Moretti holding her daughter. She didn't say any of it. There was time, and there were things that needed to settle before they were spoken. Her mother arrived at 4:50 a.m. and spent the first 10 minutes crying without apology and the next 2 hours being useful in the specific, practical way of a woman who had raised Emily and knew exactly how her daughter received comfort, not through softness, but through someone taking care of the details around her so she could feel the important things without managing the logistics simultaneously. Her father arrived by mid-morning and stood in the corner of the room with Charlotte in his arms, looking like a man who had been handed back something he thought was lost. And Emily watched him and thought about what it cost to love someone that much and what it gave you back. The weeks that followed had a texture unlike anything Emily had experienced before. Not easier, not harder. Simply different. A new kind of demanding, the specific demands of a small person who had no capacity for patience or schedule and no interest in anyone else's timeline. Emily ran on broken sleep and the particular focus of someone for whom the most important thing in any room was always the same thing, Charlotte. Gabriel came by on Tuesdays and Thursdays, the same as before, and the visits extended naturally as the weeks passed. Longer dinners, later evenings, the gradual accumulation of ordinary time, that is, Emily had come to understand how real things actually build. Not in declarations or dramatic gestures, but in the quiet accrual of showing up. He changed diapers without being asked. He learned Charlotte's specific evening cry, the one that meant hungry versus the one that meant overtired versus the one that was, as far as either of them could determine, purely editorial, with a patience and attentiveness that was characteristic of how he approached everything. He did not push anything forward. He did not name what was developing between them or ask Emily to name it. He seemed to understand, with the same instinct he brought to most things, that she was in the process of becoming something new, and that the process could not be rushed without damage. Emily appreciated it and found it occasionally maddening in equal measure. The divorce was finalized in June. Patricia called her on a Tuesday morning. Emily was in the kitchen feeding Charlotte, who was 8 weeks old and had opinions about the angle of the bottle, and said, "It's done. Judge signed off this morning." Emily shifted Charlotte against her shoulder. Okay, Patricia echoed. A pause. "You're a good client, Emily. I don't say that often because I don't mean it often." "You're a good attorney," Emily said. "I don't say that often because I've only had one, but I mean it." Patricia made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Call me if you need anything." Emily set the phone down. She looked at Charlotte, who was regarding her with the wide, unfocused attention of a very new person in the process of assembling the world from its component parts. "It's just us now," Emily said. "And your grandmother. And Nadia. And Gabriel." She tilted her head slightly. "You have a lot of people, actually. We both do." Charlotte's expression did not change. She had not yet learned to perform responses for other people's benefit, which Emily found, privately, aspirational. Roman's legal situation resolved in September, not a trial. A negotiated outcome, the specifics of which were handled by attorneys and never fully disclosed to Emily, which suited her. What Patricia told her was that Roman's cooperation with the SEC investigation had significantly reduced his personal exposure on the financial fraud counts, and that the settlement of the civil claims had cost him substantially, but not catastrophically. The criminal exposure had been managed in the way that things were managed when you had enough resources and enough cooperation to offer. He was not imprisoned. He was, however, substantially diminished. The hotel empire was restructured under new management. The public profile that had been built over a decade as the legitimate face of the Moretti name had been dismantled in the press with the particular efficiency of media that builds things up specifically because they become more interesting to tear down. Roman Moretti, at 39, looked like a man who had survived something and was unsure whether survival was the right word for it. He called Emily in October. She took the call. "I want to see her," he said. No preamble. Direct, the way Roman had always been direct, which was one of the things she had loved and one of the things that had cost her. "I know," Emily said. "I'm not asking for anything more than—" "I know, Roman." She was sitting in the garden of the townhouse. Charlotte was in the baby carrier on her chest, asleep, her weight solid and warm against Emily's sternum. The October garden was past its peak but still present. The flowers she had planted in the spring when she needed something to tend. "Come to the park on Saturday. Prospect Park, the entrance near the arch. 10 in the morning. A silence. "Okay, Roman." She looked at the garden wall, at the brick going orange and brown with the season. "She's going to know who you are. I've decided that. Whatever you've done, whatever this year has been, she's going to know her father." She paused. "What you do with that is up to you." Another silence. Longer. "Thank you," he said. His voice had none of its armor in it, just the sound of a man who had not been given the thing he expected and was sitting with the weight of receiving something better. "Saturday," she said. 10 o'clock. The park on Saturday was the particular gold of an October morning. Light coming low through the trees, the smell of leaves, and the cool that had arrived overnight. The ordinary Saturday population of the park going about its business in every direction. Emily arrived with Charlotte in the stroller. Gabriel had offered to come. She had said no, not harshly, not with explanation, but clearly. He had nodded in the way he nodded when he understood something she hadn't fully articulated and did not need to. Roman was there before her. He was standing near the arch in dark clothes, his hands in his coat pockets, looking at the tree line. When she saw him, she was struck, as she sometimes was in unguarded moments, by how much of her marriage lived in her body. Not in her mind, not in the narrative she had assembled and reassembled, but in the purely physical recognition of a person you have known in the way that proximity and years produce. She pushed the stroller to where he was standing. He looked at Charlotte. Charlotte looked back at him with the frank, assessing attention of a 5-month-old who was building her understanding of the world through direct observation and had not yet learned to moderate her scrutiny for social comfort. Roman crouched down to her level. He looked at his daughter, at the dark hair and the nose he recognized, and the chin that was Emily's grandmother's, and the hands and the complete, specific reality of a person who existed because of choices he had made and sacrifices he had not made, and a year of events that had moved the way events move when you stop controlling them. His jaw worked. He didn't speak for a moment. Then, "Hey, Charlie." Charlotte studied him. "She goes by Charlotte," Emily said. Not unkindly, factually. Roman looked up at her. Something in his expression shifted. A recognition, she thought, that the rules of this were not his to set, that he was being given access, not authority, that there was a difference, and that the difference was everything. "Charlotte," he said. He looked back at his daughter. "Hey." Charlotte reached toward him with the sudden, uncoordinated reach of a baby who has decided something exists within range. Her hand found his finger and closed around it with the grip that never failed to astonish Emily. The absolute conviction of it, the way a new person holds on. Roman's eyes closed briefly. When he opened them, they were wet, and he didn't do anything about it. Didn't look away, didn't compose his expression, just sat with it in the October morning light with his daughter's hand around his finger and the weight of the year on his face and whatever remained of himself after it. Emily stood behind the stroller and let it happen. She had thought once that she would want him to see exactly what he had lost, that there would be something clarifying in watching him understand the dimensions of the damage. But standing in the park on a Saturday morning watching Roman Moretti hold his daughter's hand while the autumn light came through the trees, she found that the thing she felt was not satisfaction and not vindication and not the clean closure of a wound. It was something more complicated and more honest. The recognition that this man had loved her inadequately and had failed her completely and had done it from inside his own limitations without the capacity to see around them until it was too late, and that this was a human failing of a very ordinary kind, and that ordinary failings were not the same as irredeemable ones, and that Charlotte deserved to find out for herself what her father was capable of becoming. 15 minutes, Emily said. Every week we'll do this. 15 minutes becomes 30, becomes an hour. We'll see how it goes. She kept her voice even, professional. The voice of someone who had learned to manage complicated things without letting the management become performance. If you're consistent, if you show up every week, on time, sober, present, we'll talk about something more formal through Patricia. A pause. If you're not consistent, we go back to what this is. Roman stood up. He looked at her directly. "I'll be consistent," he said. "I know you believe that right now," Emily said. "Show me." He nodded. Once. The nod of a man who understood that words had lost their currency with her, and that the only thing that would purchase anything now was time and presence and the accumulated weight of Saturdays. He said goodbye to Charlotte, crouching again, saying her name, something in his voice that Emily did not catalog because it wasn't hers to catalog. Then he stood, and he looked at Emily one more time with the specific expression of a man deciding whether to say something and then deciding against it, and she was grateful for that because there was nothing that needed to be said between them that could survive the air of a Saturday morning park without turning into either too much or too little. He left. Emily stood with the stroller until she couldn't see him anymore. Then she turned the stroller around and walked back into the park, into the gold light and the ordinary noise of it. The foundation gala was in November, the Moretti Family Foundation's annual fundraiser, and Emily had spent 6 weeks helping organize it in her capacity as grant coordinator, a role that had expanded naturally over the months until it was no longer part-time in any meaningful sense. She wore a navy dress that she had bought herself at a shop in Carroll Gardens, and she did not think about whether it was the right dress, or what it communicated, or whether it was appropriate for the occasion in the way she had spent years thinking about her appearance as a performance for an audience. She wore it because she liked it. Gabriel found her by the bar an hour into the evening. He looked at her in the dress and then looked away. The particular careful look of a man who is being deliberate about not making someone the object of something they haven't invited. The Hartley Grant presentation went well, he said. Their coordinator is excellent, Emily said. We should consider increasing the allocation next year. Agreed. He took a glass from the bar. He looked at the room, the people, the event, the foundation's work made visible in photographs and presentations around the perimeter of the space. You did good work on this. We did. He looked at her. Emily. His voice was still controlled, still deliberate, but there was something different in it tonight. A decision she could hear underneath the words, the sound of someone who had been patient long enough to know that patience has a natural limit. I want to say something, and I want you to hear it the same way I said it the first time I called you. Not as management, not as anything except what it actually is. She turned to look at him directly. Okay, she said. I'm not going to tell you that I've fallen in love with you, he said, because that's not the right phrase for what this actually is. I've watched you rebuild something from nothing over the course of a year. I've watched you make decisions under pressure that most people wouldn't have the constitution for. I've watched you parent your daughter with an honesty and a steadiness that I think she's going to understand more fully when she's older. He paused. And I've watched you sit at the kitchen table on Tuesday evenings when you thought I was absorbed in my work and I wasn't. And I think that's when I understood what I actually felt. Emily was quiet. I'm not asking for anything tonight, Gabriel said. I'm not asking you to decide anything or say anything. I wanted you to know, so that you weren't navigating the next part without that information. The gala moved around them, voices and music and the particular low light of a November evening in a well-attended room. Emily looked at Gabriel Moretti, at the man who had called her when he didn't have to, who had offered her a job when she needed a reason to be useful, who had slept on her couch and moved her boxes and held her daughter in a hospital room at 4:30 in the morning and said, "Hey," in a voice that was quiet and completely serious. I know, she said. He waited. I've known for a while, she said. I needed the year to finish first, before I could look at anything that wasn't the next necessary thing. I know, he said. That's why I waited. She looked at him for a long moment. Ask me to dinner, she said. Not takeout at the kitchen table, actual dinner, somewhere with tablecloths. Something happened in his face. Not dramatic, not performed. Just the expression of a man who has been holding something carefully for a long time and has been told he can set it down. Saturday, he said. Saturday, she said. Boss. The spring came the way springs come after hard winters. Not gently, not with apology, but with the particular conviction of something that has been waiting and is no longer willing to wait. Charlotte was 14 months old and had recently discovered that she had legs for a purpose beyond existing. And she moved through the garden of the Carroll Gardens townhouse with the stumbling absolute determination of someone for whom the discovery of forward motion was the most significant event in recent history. The garden was no longer the overgrown thing Eleanor had handed over. Emily had worked it through the fall and the spring, mornings while Charlotte slept, evenings when Gabriel came by, the slow, patient work of putting something disordered back into shape. It was not a formal garden. It was not a showpiece. It had the slightly imperfect quality of something tended by a person who had learned gardening the way you learn most useful things, by doing it wrong first, then doing it better. Eleanor came on Sunday afternoons. She and Emily had developed over the course of the year a relationship that defied easy description. Not warm exactly, not the softness of women who comfort each other freely, but something more durable, a mutual recognition, an honesty that had developed from Emily's refusal to pretend and Eleanor's incapacity for it. They sat in the garden on Sunday afternoons and drank tea and talked about the foundation and about Charlotte's development and occasionally about Roman, who was doing what he had said he would do, showing up every Saturday, on time, present. The accumulation of Saturdays becoming slowly and without ceremony a record of a different kind of consistency than he had ever managed to demonstrate during the marriage. He was not Charlotte's father yet in any full sense. He was a man she recognized, a man she reached for occasionally, a man who sat on the ground in the park and let her pull herself up against his knee and said her name with a quality in his voice that Emily had decided was not hers to judge. He was making himself someone Charlotte would know. What Charlotte would do with that knowledge when she was old enough to make sense of it was not something Emily could determine in advance. She had stopped trying to determine things in advance. It was one of the practical lessons of the year. Gabriel proposed in the garden on a Sunday in April. Not with theater. Without a planned speech or a restaurant or a moment manufactured for the purpose. He was crouching in the corner of the garden where the raised bed needed replanting, and Emily was watching Charlotte navigate the path between the beds, and he looked up from what he was doing and said, "Marry me." Just that. Emily looked at him. At the dirt on his hands and the way he was looking at her, directly, without qualification, the same way he had looked at her across the coffee shop table the first time they met, and she had still been too raw to see it for what it was. Charlotte chose this moment to sit down abruptly in the middle of the path, which was a decision she made frequently and without apology, and looked at both of them with the frank attention of a person who was assembling the world. "Yes," Emily said. Gabriel looked at Charlotte, then back at Emily. "Yes," Emily said again, in case the first one hadn't been clear enough, though his expression suggested it had been completely clear and that he was simply doing what he always did, which was taking a moment to let something real settle before responding to it. He stood up. He came to her. He put one hand on her face, still careful, still deliberate, the same quality of attention he brought to everything. And she felt the particular texture of being known by someone who had paid attention from the beginning without requiring anything of her in return. Charlotte said something in the wordless, emphatic language of a 14-month-old and pulled herself upright on Emily's leg. "She approves," Emily said. "I'm glad," Gabriel said. "I was worried about her opinion." They married the following autumn in Eleanor's garden in Connecticut. Small. Immediate family. Nadia as Emily's witness, an address she had chosen herself and which Emily had approved with genuine admiration. Eleanor in something dark and precisely fitted, standing straight at the edge of the garden with an expression that had the same quality it always had. Not softness, not demonstration, but something beneath both of those things. Something that had survived 40 years and 2 sons and more loss than Emily would ever fully know. Charlotte, at 2 years old, was a participant in the ceremony in the sense that she was present and mobile and had opinions about the proceedings that she expressed without inhibiting herself. She sat in Emily's mother's arms for most of it and watched with the serious attention she brought to things she was still assembling. The vows were short. Neither of them was given to performance. Gabriel said, "I will show up. I will tell you the truth. I will be here when it's hard, not just when it's easy. I will love your daughter as my own because she already is." Emily said, "I know who you are. I've watched you for a year and a half, and I know who you are in the dark, and in the ordinary, and in the difficult, and there is no one I trust more and no one I want more, and that's all it needs to be." The garden was full of the particular October light of Connecticut in the fall. The trees had turned. The light came through them at an angle that made the afternoon look like the beginning of something, which it was. 3 years later, Emily stood at the kitchen window of the Carroll Gardens townhouse on a spring morning and watched Gabriel in the garden below. Charlotte, who was 5 now and fierce and funny and had her father's dark hair and her mother's particular quality of paying attention to things without announcing it, was directing Gabriel in the planting of something, her small, emphatic hand pointing at the ground with absolute authority about where it should go. Gabriel crouched and planted it exactly where she pointed. Without argument, without modification. The sound of a baby from upstairs, Daniel, 6 months old, Gabriel and Emily's son, who had arrived in January with the same conviction Charlotte had arrived with, and who had thus far expressed no interest in modifying his timeline for anyone's convenience. Emily went upstairs. She picked Daniel up from the crib and stood at the window of his room, which was across the hall from Charlotte's room, which still had the mobile she had assembled alone on the floor at 30 weeks pregnant, adjusted now so he could reach it, because things got repurposed in a house where people were actually living. She looked out the window at the garden below, at Gabriel and Charlotte and the thing they were planting, Charlotte's hand still pointing, Gabriel still complying. She thought about a clinic on the Upper East Side and a television screen and the particular sound of a heartbeat at 148 beats per minute. She thought about a suitcase packed while Roman was filing paperwork in another room. She thought about Nadia's guest room and the legal pad and the key Eleanor pressed into her hand on a stoop in Carroll Gardens. She thought about 14 hours of labor and Gabriel's vending machine coffee and 4:30 in the morning and, hey, She thought about the year of Saturdays that had built Roman into someone Charlotte would know and what it had cost him to show up each time, and how that cost, accumulated over 3 years of consistent presence, had become something else. Not forgiveness exactly, not reconciliation, but the thing that exists when someone does the work without requiring credit for it, which was its own kind of evidence. She thought about what it meant to have arrived here from there. The distance was not the impressive thing. The distance was enormous and she knew it. What she had come to understand, slowly, without announcement, the way you understand things that matter, was that the distance had not been crossed by being brave or by being right or by winning anything. It had been crossed by getting up the next morning, and the morning after that, and by letting certain people in and holding the door for them when they arrived, and by learning, finally, the difference between the people who showed up when it was convenient and the people who showed up because they had decided to, which was not a decision you made once, but one you made every time. Daniel made a sound against her shoulder, the warm, uncomplicated weight of him. Below in the garden, Charlotte laughed at something, the specific laugh of a 5-year-old who has decided something is genuinely funny rather than performing amusement for an audience. And Gabriel looked up at the sound of it with an expression Emily recognized as the one he reserved for moments he intended to remember. He looked up at the window then, at Emily and Daniel. He raised one hand, not a wave exactly, just the acknowledgement of where they both were. Emily raised her hand back. The spring morning continued around them. The city went on in its continuous, indifferent, magnificent way outside the garden walls. Daniel breathed against her shoulder. Charlotte's laugh carried up through the window. Emily stood at the window of the house she had built from the wreckage of a different life and looked at the man in the garden who had decided early and without equivocation that she was worth showing up for. And she thought about what it cost to be broken and what it gave you if you let it. Not the suffering, not the loss, not the year of impossible decisions, but the knowing that came after. The specific, unimprovable knowledge of what you were made of, which turned out to be more than she had thought. Which turned out to be exactly enough. The garden, the light, the ordinary spring morning of a life that had not been given but built, one Moretti at a time, on the particular foundation of showing up. Fade out.